Well, hello everyone. My name's Paul Weller. I come from living between the UK and Germany, and I'm Emeritus Professor at the University of Derby in the UK and a non-stipendiary research fellow in religion and society at Regent's Park College, University of Oxford. Like numbers of people here, for many years I've been trying to research and understand Hizmet and the teaching of Fethullah Gulen, and insofar as I can also to reflect things back to the Hizmet community and movement about my understandings. And I think, like many here, I have also found myself personally, as well as professionally, challenged as a human being, in my case as a Christian believer, by the examples and activities of Hizmet friends and colleagues. So it's our opportunity today to further that learning in an academic and intellectual sense, but also potentially to open ourselves up to that personal and religious or spiritual challenge through the presentations of our speakers. And as we hear, we have three speakers here in person in the panel. The one that's going to be a video presentation will still take place at that slot in this session, but otherwise we welcome very much Anwar Alam, who will be speaking on situating the responses of the Hizmet movement to contemporary challenges, a postmodern perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My sincere thanks to Professor Sophia Pandey for initiating this very valuable academic conference. So I'm extremely grateful to her, actually. My thanks to Alp and Osman, who brought me here, actually, to participate in this conference. So thank you very much. And the chairperson of this session has commanded me finish it within 15 minutes. I do assure you, sir. It will be done within 10 to 12 minutes. So don't worry about that. So I'll be adhered to the time because I understand that. But I think in my mind is that there are two fundamental questions, actually. And in my mind is that that how we are going to situate or contextualize the responses of the Hizmet movement since 2016, or even, for example, since 2013, because it has been under the repressions for so long, it's almost a decade, actually. I have not probably come across or any ethnic, religious, or ethnic political movement or such kind of the political persecutions, actually. The questions for me is not that the Hizmet movement till date is responding very peacefully, non-violently, and that is something remarkable. The question for me is that from where do they derive their strength, actually? What kind of capacity? How did they have built that capacity, actually? What kind of paradigm? What kind of their approaches, actually? And if you look at, for example, is this a very remarkable pacific response to the entire atrocity and the repression that has been going on since 2013, what comes out is that if you look at, for example, the internal repression within Turkey, it's not merely the questions of the AKP regime, it's not merely the questions for me, the Erdogan regime. It's the whole questions of the political establishments, actually, which would like to basically corner, which would like to basically isolate, which would like to basically put in a boxes a kind of the social and the religious movement that somehow basically trying to question some of the hegemonic and dominant perspective that exists in Turkey. It's not merely challenged by AKP. It's almost entire political forces, whether it's the CHP or the others or MHP and these and that, and everybody has really got united actually to silence this kinds of political forces. And therefore, one has to really, it is not a question for me, Erdogan versus Gulen, and that's rubbish. I mean, that's absolutely rubbish for me, to be honest with you. I did not want to really have such kind of the binary that is a conflict between the two individuals as such. That's one. Second is that the response is constructed or situated. Look at, for example, the very lukewarm approach of the international community to what has happened in Turkey, actually. I would certainly say it's a lukewarm approach, actually. For whatever reasons, actually. It's a strategic importance of Turkey, government to government businesses, for whatever actually. Maybe it would happen in some other places, the response would be deeply. The third is that there is a very powerful modern social science. And this modern social science that basically emerged in the West, it has two fundamental premises. One fundamental premises is that the power is the category of power is central to the social sciences. Nothing moves without the idea of power. If you want to really understand anything, the cooperation, altruism, philanthropy does not have any role as far as the process of social change is concerned. The only role is the whole question of influence, power, hierarchy, this kinds of fundamental. And the lastly is that there's a very pervasive that has come to modern belief, and that's a modern belief is that Islam is essentially political. It's not about a question of civil versus political, as we see yesterday. It is essentially political as such. And once we have this pervasive belief, and I do perfectly, it's a matter of belief. It's not a question of the evolutions. Every system has belief. You know, religion is a personal matter. It's a personal belief of the secularism as such. Nothing to demonstrate. It's just a belief. You know, and within that, you have to structure your responses actually. And within this, when I look at, for example, that from where the Hizmet movement really draw to be strength, to remain peaceful, to remain non-violent actually, to internalize the repressions actually, to continue actually, and to continue on the whole idea of the positive actions actually. And then what I realize is that part of the problem in the Turkish scholarship of the Hizmet movement is that the Hizmet movement, for some reason, has been historically treated as a modern phenomena actually. There's an entire discourse of compatibility of the Islam with the modernity as such. And once you travel in that discourse, then no matter how pure your intention, and no matter what is your perspectives, you are brought to Hizmet movement within the discourse of the state as such. And this is where things went wrong actually. Somehow, once you happen that, and even though you're not aspiring, you don't have political party and this and that, but as long as you're operating within the discursive tradition of the modernity as such, and modernity is all about a boundary actually. You know, it's a boundary between civil versus state, it's a boundary between religious and for example, secular, it's a boundary between rural and urban, it's a boundary between reactionary and progressive actually, it's a boundary between, you know, it's all about a boundary. But if you look at, for example, the Hizmet movement universe, the first thing it challenged this boundary of the modernity as such. You know, it fundamentally questioned this boundary. And it could be in a position to question this boundary because the Hizmet movement does not have the notion of the other actually. Since it does not have the notions of the other actually, it would be in a position to move flexible, entering into the dialogues with the multiple culture, tradition, civilization, and other things. And therefore, my proposition which here I'm making is that I'm trying to venture out that instead of understanding Hizmet movement as typically a kind of the part of the modern discourse or modern phenomena, I would like to really propose here before that is essentially a postmodern phenomena actually. And no matter that how separate is the discourse of postmodernity as such, no matter how incoherent the shape of the postmodernity discourse which actually emerged in the 1970s, the Hizmet movement, or it basically derives from its strength what I call, for example, the Mujaddidi traditions of the Islam as such. It has a remarkable elements of what comes or what is being normally discussed within the postmodernity as such. Like, for example, there's this entire idea, like postmodernity has debunked the entire legacy of enlightenment. What to do with this idea of the enlightenment, which ultimately move in the direction of the colonizations actually, and racism and this and one part. It's not that Fatehullah Gulen reject all positive results or all positive consequence, but there is a dark side of the modernity as such. Yes, modernity did achieve the whole idea of the remarkable educational professionalisms, a very high degree of professionalisms in the various fields. But that modernity or that educational breakthrough or that technological breakthrough in the ultimate analysis did not prevent the First World War or the Second World War or the Holocaust or, for example, the large numbers of the ethnic conflicts and the political conflicts and religious conflicts that you see all around the world actually because of the various reasons, and all has been affected by virtue of the modern conditions actually. What has been in this movement that it has really managed to remain peaceful, it has really managed to be non-violent. And there are, if you look at, for example, the Huzif Effendi writings and Fatehullah Gulen writings, what comes is true actually. Number one is that unlike, for example, the minority movement where education has been taken very seriously, Hizmet movement is a part and the parcel of the majoritarian national identity. And that is something, it is true, it has been historically deprived of the power structures, and in that sense it could be considered as a minority. But it has been the part of the majority and national identity. Once you are part of the majority identity, you may be materially poor, but my history is rich. I am powerful. One of the consequences and one of the implications of the writings of Fatehullah Gulen is essentially to eliminate the idea of power from the Islamic traditions as such, from the Islamic history as such. Because as long as you remain a power-centered, if you do not remove the idea of the power, you can never be at peace actually, no matter what is your advocacy is that. And therefore, what you find in embedded is that the first thing through this movement slowly and gradually, in a way it has been interpreted, the Turkish history and the Ottoman history, in the way it is engaging with the Islamic tradition is essentially delegitimize the idea of the power. Delegitimize the idea of the superiority actually. Empower the people with the values of the dialogue. Empower the people with the values of empathy. Empower the people with the values of compassion. Empower, and these are what Huzif Effendi or, for example, Fatehullah Gulen is saying is not all the modern values. These are the universal values. For all fundamental reason is that modernity and the modern values, if you have to look at very closely, it is internally and externally linked with the idea of the nation state actually. It is linked with the idea of homogeneity as such. It is linked with the idea of uniformity. It is linked with the idea of centralizations. Freedom, democracy, other things are all belong to the different culture, civilization and other things. It is not the monopoly of the modernity as such. And therefore, when you look at, for example, in the Hizmet movement, these are nothing but basically claiming that this comes from the prophetic path as such, very much embedded in that structures. And therefore, when you look at, for example, Hizmet movement is all about the postmodernity, is that it basically rejects to a large extent of this modern homogeneity, centralizations and the other things. And slowly and gradually, if you look at, for example, what you find remarkably that in Hizmet movement is that unlike the most Islamic traditions which I have come across, that here is a position that the state is not fundamental for the protection and the growth and the enrichment of Islam as such. It doesn't believe. It prioritizes individual, it prioritizes civil society, it prioritizes social infrastructures over the idea of the states. That's very, very clear actually. It also debunks the whole idea of universal regions. Where is the questions of regions? Yes, it's a question of the transcendental truth, that's for sure. Fatehullah Gulen and the Hizmet movement would like to certainly celebrate the idea of transcendental truth or the one truth, but nonetheless, it is open because all transcendental truths are subjective verses of the transcendental truth. It's all subjective version. How to have a reach between the subjective versions of the transcendental truth, that's a normal challenge actually. Yes, I believe in transcendental truth. This did take place in the European traditions in the 16th and 17th centuries actually. Bitter conflict, Protestant and Catholics, and then ultimately produced the whole idea of the principle of the relative truth. Hizmet did initiate the whole idea of the interfaith, but it's still very much weak as far as the intrafaith is concerned. I'm very happy that in the United States of America, they have initiated the intrafaith. Because if Hizmet is all about living with differences, then you have to live with a multiple subjective vision of the differences. It's not about erasing of the differences actually, in fact. And that's what you find within the Hizmet discourse, that there is a remarkable celebration of the lifestyles. There's a remarkable celebration of the individual lifestyles. There's a remarkable celebration of pluralism. There's a remarkable celebration of that. And these are not the fundamental features of the nation state. And it is this question, when Fatehullah Gulen basically says that diversity is divinely intended. And I know that my own friend in Hizmet movement will have a different interpretation of this statement, but they will allow me that I am entitled to have my own interpretations as far as this statement is concerned. And I know that my Hizmet friends will have a much more limited idea or much more limited understanding of this whole idea of diversities. But I have really not come across any Islamic scholar so far. I have been engaged. I come from India. India has been home of the many global Islamic movements, actually. I know many kinds of, but I have not really come across. Partly because of the reason is that the most dominant Islamic vision is the vision of the homogeneity as such. We would like to desire. We would like to desire. We would like to homogenize. And we have remarkable homogenized idea of a good life. Modernity is all about homogenized secular idea of a good life. Somehow Fatehullah Gulen and the Hizmet movement, for the first time in the history that I see, is debunking this issue and would like to celebrate the diversities. And this diversity is not about, for example, is that there is a one Muslim monolithic, plus one Christian monolithic, plus one Jewish monolithic, but rather taking diversity within Muslims, actually. And that's something very fit. It's not about when you do the interfaith dialogue and all, it's a dialogue between Muslims, but the Muslims' imagination of Islam is fundamentally different in India. I mean, you move from Bengal to Tamil, it's completely different, actually. You move from the Arabs to the Indian subcontinent, to Malaysia, to Indonesia. Will you have a dialogue among the Muslims themselves? So when you look at, for example, Fatehullah Gulen imaginations, when he's saying is that diversity, it's a different universe, it's a different linguistics, and a different other things, actually. And if you look at this position, then what appears to me, actually, is that AKP in Turkey, other forces, where they are standing is basically the 19th century modern version of the electoral democracy, actually. The 19th century idea of the nation state, where Fatehullah Gulen is basically standing today, is the late 20th century, 21st century idea of a democracy, actually. And that's the fundamental conflict. And this fundamental conflict that has produced one of the harshest response, one of the most repressive response to the Hizmet movement, actually. And when I look at, for example, audience here in 2016, the fundamental question that many people ask me, will the movement survive? That was a fundamental question. Down the line 5 years, the movement has really not survived. It has managed, it is standing well, it is moving, and it has come back on the road once again, actually. Good to Hizmet movement. Thank you very much.